Hello everyone, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Hannah if you're new here, and today I am talking about the 5 books that I read in September. So these are the books that are new to me. I did 2 rereads that I won't be discussing in this video, but let's dive into the 5 new to me books from September. So the first genre we're talking about is romance. I read 2 romance novels, and the first one we're going to talk about is Made for Each Other by Lynn Painter. Now this is a 3-star read for me, and honestly this is probably the book one of the most disappointing books that I've read all year, because the beginning of this book was a 5-star experience. I was really into this romance, and then the main character's decisions really impacted my enjoyment of the story, and feeling like our main male love interest deserved better. So this is about a woman who is going to grad school, and to pay her bills, she is a waitress, she's working at a grocery store, and she also is a maid part-time. And so her apartment becomes infested with bugs, and she can't stay there for like a week until they can get it fumigated. So she decides to crash at the apartment of a millionaire that she cleans the apartment for, because she knows he's going to be out of town for that week, which is kind of crazy. And then she wakes up and his parents are there, and the parents are like, "Oh, you must be the girlfriend. We've heard so much about you." And so she kind of plays along to get out of the situation. And it turns out Declan, I believe is his name, has been telling his employer and his parents that he has this girlfriend, and her name happens to be Abby, which is our main female protagonist's name. And so they end up deciding to fake date. So he decides to he also needs to fake date her to pretend that he is like a family man, that he's serious about life, so he can advance in his career. So it's kind of a bonkers, way out there premise, but honestly, I kind of like premises that are a little wild. What ended up not working for me is some of the character decisions that Abby made. She seemed to flip-flop personalities to suit the whims of the plot instead of her character staying consistent throughout the book. Here's an example. So at the beginning of the book, she has no scruples about bumming it at this guy's house who she doesn't even know, but she refuses to take his money after the agreed upon fake dating period is over, even though they signed a contract, and she's the one who wrote the contract for the money. You know, this is what I'm going to do as your fake girlfriend. This is what you're going to do as my fake boyfriend. In the end, I get my student loans paid off. So she decides not to take his money and not cash the check. So she's so morally upright, she's not going to do that. And then not but 5 minutes later, she turns around and snoops on him when he expressly told her to leave it alone. I won't spoil what specifically she does or what he's trying to keep on the DL, but she takes a screenshot of one of his emails and sends it to her friend to do some internet sleuthing. So I was so she seems. And of course, that's what the conflict is about in the 3rd act. So it's the character, that's what I mean when I say the character seems to be flip-flopping her morality to fit the idea that the author had in her head for the plot, instead of the plot following the characters consistently and their motivations and it being character-driven. I actually really liked Declan as a hero. I did not like Abby, and I think honestly, it was the author and the execution of her character more than my actual dislike of her as a character, because I could see the potential. Again, the beginning of the book was a 5-star experience, and then by the end, I was so upset at the execution that I couldn't enjoy it. So it really brought my rating down, and I think Declan deserved better. Anyway, this video is going to be long anyway, even though I only have 5 books to talk about, so let's leave it at that. Then we have Dream On Ramona Riley by Ashley Herring Blake. This is a 3.5 out of 5 star romance for me. This is a sapphic romance about two women who, one lives in a small town. She basically had to raise her younger sister and put her dreams on hold. She wants to be a fashion designer for Hollywood, like a costume designer. And then we're also following Dylan, who is an actor. And Dylan is filming a new rom-com in our other main character's small town. And these two actually had an encounter in this small town when they were children and kind of like spent a night together. Like they were like 13. And so they had a chaste kiss. But that like left some burning, lasting impression on these two, and they realize who each other are and end up falling in love. This one was fine. Ashley Herring Blake, I have 2 books of hers that I gave 5 stars, and now 3 books that I have thought very middling things about. Another 3.5 star, a 2 star, and then this 3.5 star. So we're, 60% of her books I haven't really vibed with. Part of me thinks that these characters, this is just my opinion, these characters needed a little more growing up individually, I think, to work on their own problems before I was convinced that they were the ones meant to be for each other and could handle a long-term committed relationship. To be honest, they're in their 20s, and I'm not saying they're not mature, they just both have realizations throughout the course of the novel to kickstart a character journey, but they don't actually follow all the way through with that character journey. So it's like I almost wanted more of that on page, and then they could have a romance afterwards. You know what I mean? So it just, the pacing, the execution of the character development didn't quite blend beautifully for me. So 3.5 stars. I read one nonfiction this month, and it's called The Ice Pick Surgeon by Sam Keen. This tagline is murder, fraud, sabotage, piracy, and other dastardly deeds perpetuated in the name of science. This is like little vignettes about these historical people, historical events that happened in the name of science and scientific progress that were illegal, morally not great. Fun thing about me, maybe it's fun, is I kind of like medical history. I find it fascinating in a morbid, weird kind of way, one could say. Not really true crime, but medical stuff, it does kind of intrigue me, kind of how we got to where we are. While this was interesting, there were some chapters I was already familiar with the historical events around them, which was kind of cool. I was like, oh, I already knew about this one. It was easy to read, it was interesting, but I will say I was annoyed by this author because instead of citing primary and secondary sources when talking about these little pieces of history, he kept referencing his own podcast for you to go and check out to learn more about a particular topic. And I was like, that's so self-indulgent and annoying, and I really didn't like it. So I ended up giving this like a 4 star. Like, I thought it was interesting, easy to read, nothing to write home about in terms of its execution, and a little self-indulgent. The one sci-fi I read was A Botanical Daughter by Noah Medlock. This is a historical fantasy, sort of Frankenstein inspired, loosely inspired story about 2 men who live in a conservatory. One of them is a botanist and the other is a taxidermist. That's how they make their money. And they kind of decide to create a person, a being out of fungus and a dead body. That's where the Frankenstein element comes in. And so this is a 4 star read for me. There were some moments in here where I was kind of touched emotionally because they initially treat the being, the creature, as their daughter. But the botanist has a change of heart kind of halfway through the book, and it seems to kind of come out of nowhere. and is a little out of character in that moment that I was pretty disappointed. So he could like become the villain, kind of. And I really didn't like that. I thought it actually, so, and then he's like treating her as a specimen and a creature and locking her up and not being very nice to her. It would honestly make more sense if the cold hard scientist thing kind of was consistent throughout the book and he was kind of an ass, and the taxidermist character was the one kind of trying to speak to his humanity and think of this being as their daughter. Whereas, because the taxidermist in the beginning, when they actually create her, has to convince, or the biologist has to convince the taxidermist in the beginning of the book that this is their daughter. You should love her like a daughter. And then he has the change of heart seemingly out of nowhere. So like something didn't quite work in the narrative there and in the character consistency. And it would make more sense if the biologist was just kind of mean the whole time and the taxidermist was like the fatherly one to this being. This also had like a sapphic romance in it, which I didn't hate except for the sex scene. It's a little obscure. It's not super detailed, but you know what's happening, and that's a dead body that is covered in fungus and has fungusy plant matter. That was kind of a little bit of a horror element to me, but the character receiving that was into it. So, I mean, more power to you, I guess. Different. I don't want to yuck anybody's yum, but that was a lot for me. So anyway, I enjoyed the story. I didn't love the story. It was a 4-star read. This is just loosely based on Frankenstein. There isn't much similarity in the plot other than just like raising a corpse. My favorite book I read this month was my fantasy read, and that is The Curse of Chalion by Lois McMaster Bujold. I always say her name wrong, so I have to say it very slowly. This is about Kazarel, who is 35 years old at the start of the story, and he has just escaped enslavement and is walking to the home of where he served as a page. And he was a soldier for many, many years. He used to be a lordling's son, but his title and his family kind of fell out of favor, and his whole family died, and so they like gave his lands to somebody else because they thought he was dead instead of enslaved. So he ends up coming to the home that he served in as a page and ends up being the tutor of the crowned princess, which is very high honor indeed. And of course, they don't stay at this little like outskirts estate. They end up getting called back to court, and political intrigue ensues. I love this. I gave this 5 stars. The things that I really loved about this is Kazarel is such a smart and competent main character. He understands politics and is guiding the princess through the politics, and she's actually like, she fumbles a little bit, but she ends up listening to him, which is so nice and refreshing. I enjoyed the magic in here. It's very low fantasy. There is some magical elements, but it's not like the main part of the story. The main part is the political machinations and maneuvering. There is a villain in here who is pretty disgusting. A couple of villains that I thought were fun to hate. And there was an adventure element. So good. I just had a lovely time. I love political fantasy, and this was that to a T. The one criticism I have about this story is that Kazarel ends up having a like B or even C plot sub-romance with a 19-year-old who ends up being 36 at the end of the story, and the young woman is 20 at the end of the story. Even so, he didn't have to do that. She pursues him to make it okay, but it still kind of ooked me out a little bit. Like, in my heart of hearts, I liked them personality-wise. They actually really complemented each other, which is another way the author is trying to convince me that this was okay. But I still am not a big fan of age gap romances, and especially in this context when it's an older man and a very barely adult woman. Really bothers me still. So, like, even though I gave this 5 stars, it's got a big, like, asterisk. Like, you could have just aged her up 25, 27. Come on, like, just a little older, and I would have, like, thought this was perfect. So that's my one small, like, critique, but overall I loved this story. Anyway, those are the 5 new things that I read in September. What were your favorite reads of September? I would love to know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video of mine very soon. Bye!